State University. The nude body of a dead woman was discovered in Whiskey Bay on the outskirts of Baton Rouge. And because she had been raped and brutalized in a manner very similar to 2 other recent unsolved murders, the police thought that one man was probably responsible for all 3 crimes, and the possibility of a serial killer quickly saturated the local media. Then another body, a 23-year-old girl from Lafayette, was discovered in November, and another body, a 26-year-old LSU grad student, in March. I remember long cigarette breaks with my friends, compulsively swapping updates about our SK. That's what we call them, to take the edge off. It's actually kind of hard to say the word serial killer when you're talking about someone who took his last victim while she was unloading groceries from her car just a couple blocks from your house, so he was the SK. Anyway, according to the news, any number of unsolved murders from the past several years could belong to this guy, and the potential body count rose to about a dozen, and then up to 20 women. Now the newspaper looked like a yearbook page. Almost every day they published the headshot photos of all the victims lined up in a row, until their names and pretty faces settled deep into our consciousness. Then the FBI showed up, and they started this 24-hour hotline for tips. I remember the ads they were running on the local AM talk radio station. The serial killer is out there. You don't think he could be your neighbor, or your boyfriend, or your uncle, but the serial killer could be anyone. Report all suspicious activity to the serial killer tip line. Can you imagine? I actually had a handful of male acquaintances that were questioned and swabbed for DNA because they'd been implicated in a tip. In fact, that hotline was overwhelmed with anonymous callers as fear grew into paranoia in Baton Rouge. I tried not to let it get to me. Certainly didn't find any reason to call the tip line, but being all alone and single, I would lie awake sometimes listening to the night and run in my mind about the things that had happened to those women. I was single at that time, but had actually only recently become so. I'd been dating a guy over the past year, Fred, and we broke up at the height of the SK obsession in Baton Rouge. We tried, but I think that had been a doomed relationship from the start. When we first started hanging out, he had just divorced a woman that he'd been married to for 10 years. But he didn't like to talk about that to me. I was only 22 at the time, and a failed marriage was something that was much heavier and more significant than anything that had ever happened in my life. So that topic was off limits. We worked around it. We got kind of serious for a while, but then things got bad and we broke up. Lots of times. I remember once around the time of the final breakup, Fred came over to my house one night to talk, and we got into this deep, honest conversation about what all had gone wrong between us. And then Fred got really emotional, and he finally started to tell me some things about his marriage. But it was weird. His whole affect changed. He became entirely different as he was telling me about these intensely dark times with this woman. And I thought that was incredibly strange. I had never seen him act anything like that before. And as he was talking, I started to think about how nobody that Fred knew in Baton Rouge had ever seen or heard from his ex-wife after they divorced. He told everyone that she had moved away and was isolating herself because the whole thing had been just so hard on her. But what did we really know? Could anybody besides Fred even confirm that this woman was alive? I started to think about how the serial killer's first victims had first started showing up just a few months after his divorce. And as I continued to listen to him tell me about these dark things in this strange new tone of voice, I began to realize that I was in tremendous danger. My car keys were on the coffee table between us, but I didn't look down. I focused all of my energy on acting normal, breathing normal, as I counted inside my head. 3, 2, 1. Then I grabbed the car keys, ran out the door, down the stairs, out into my car, slammed the door and locked it, and as I pulled out the driveway, I looked up and I saw Fred standing at the top of my stairs looking totally confused. Because of course he was not the SK. He was actually just somebody who I had cared about, who was trying to open up to me about a really difficult subject, which is something that I hope he has been willing to do with other women since then, despite the totally batshit response he received from me that night. So, anyway, a couple months later, Derek Todd Lee was arrested and identified as the real Baton Rouge serial killer. He'd been definitively linked to a couple of the victims through DNA evidence. And the FBI figured he had killed about 10 or 12 women over several years, but now they'd gotten him. It was over. Then I graduated, moved away, and lost track of this story for a long time. Until, just last year, I was telling somebody about all this, and we decided to look at the Wikipedia page for the Baton Rouge serial killer. Well, I didn't find one. Instead, I found a Wikipedia page for the Baton Rouge serial killers. 2 men killing women at the same time. Turns turns out this other guy, Sean Vincent Gillis, is now believed to be responsible for fully half of the sadistic murders that were originally attributed to Derek Todd Lee at that time. What? God, I remembered the exalted relief that I felt in 2004 after Derek Todd Lee had been put away. How wonderful it was that we weren't all going to be so crazy and afraid anymore. Well, at that time, this other guy had still been out there, and he killed again in Baton Rouge before he was caught. You know, when the news makes you feel the killer's breath on the back of your neck, the reality is that the world out there is really just the same world as it ever was. And when they tell you they got him, it's over, good has triumphed over evil. The world is still just the same as it ever was. So you gotta take the news with a grain of salt, and hope y'all stay safe out there.